All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Masao Suzuki. I'm speaking on behalf of the Road Socialist Organization on the state of the economy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Masao Suzuki. I'm speaking on behalf of the Road Socialist Organization. Share the latest with you. I should note that sometime within the next few hours. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Masao Suzuki. I'm going to be speaking on behalf of the Freedom. Will be showing up in the Fight Back News website. I submitted the article yesterday, but it just hasn't gotten up yet. But what I wanted to mainly talk about today is the latest report from the U.S. Department of Labor on the unemployment and jobs for the month of September. I do want to note that this information the government's providing is based on a survey during the week of that contained September 12th. So it's already a couple of weeks old. So I'm going to also be talking about what's going on with the unemployment insurance numbers, which are just from last week. So they're a little more up to date. But anyway, the Labor Department reported a continued drop in the unemployment rate down to 7.9% in September from 8.4% in August. But of the 1 million people who left the rolls of being officially unemployed, 70% of them dropped out of the labor force. That is, they did not find jobs. Because to be officially unemployed in the government's count, you have to be both not working for pay and looking for work. And so what happened last month, for a number of reasons, a lot of people stopped looking for work, and therefore they were no longer counted as unemployed, and therefore this reduced the unemployment rate without actually them getting more jobs. Now, even worse, of the people who left the labor force, who stopped looking for work and had no jobs, about 90% of them were women. And this is reflecting the fact that women have been hit really hard by the recession in, well, actually in two ways, and a third way is coming up, unfortunately. So the first way women were hit is, unlike most recessions where manufacturing and or construction are the hardest hit industries, and those industries tend to be mainly dominated by male workers. So what we typically see is that the unemployment rate for men goes up faster and higher than that of women. Now, this recession, for the first time on record, the industries that were hit the hardest had to do with travel and lodging and restaurants and other service industries. And so most of the people who have been hit with the unemployment were women, and the unemployment rate for women rose faster and higher than that of men. And then right now, so you're seeing both the effects of what can happen if, the big wave of layoffs was actually in March and April, and it's now been more than, well, it's getting to be about 6 months since then. People start getting dropped off unemployment insurance after 6 months, or they get tired of looking for work, or they give up on it. And then another factor, of course, is because many school districts are not able to go back to in-classroom instruction because of safety concerns. Like where I teach, we're all, not, well, almost all teaching our classes online. But this then makes a big issue about what to do with children. How do you supervise their schooling at home? There's a lot less childcare centers that are open. And so because of the traditional emphasis on women doing domestic work, taking care of the kids. A lot of women are dropping out of the labor force because of that reason. The third one, which is we started to see in this latest report, is that this latest report only showed about 661,000 new jobs created, net new jobs. And this is down a lot from August, when 1.5 million jobs are created. And while in a normal time, this would be like, OMG, job creation. But the fact of the matter is the economy lost like 22 million jobs back in March and April. And so we've really only come back about halfway. The economy is still down about 11 million jobs from February, from before the recession started. So the return of jobs has really dramatically slowed down last month. And one part of that slowdown was a big job loss, actually, in the government sector, in particular among state and local government workers. And this is going, as this trend continues, because government budgets have been hit hard by declines in tax revenues. And so this is leading many of them to cut back on employment. In fact, initially, right when the recession hit, many state and local governments were quick. They shed close to 1 million jobs right away. I know in my own hometown of San Jose, they basically laid off every single part-time worker that they had almost immediately. And they're trying to hang on, but there's growing waves of job cuts. And the thing about it is the majority of state and local government workers are also women. And so women are going to be bearing the brunt of this building wave of cuts in public sector jobs. Now, within the among women, of course, there's also still inequality by nationality. Black women in particular have been hard hit, both in terms of unemployment and also being forced out of the labor force. So Black women ended up leaving the labor force at twice the rate of white women in September. And unfortunately, there's also large numbers of Black and other oppressed nationality women working for the government. So they are also going to be hit hard by the coming wave of layoffs there. Now, of course, I'm sure many of you, hopefully all of you, have heard of the hospitalization of President Trump because of COVID-19, and then a number of leading Republican senators, advisors to the president, have also been infected, and some have had to been hospitalized. And while this emphasizes the continued danger of the pandemic, which unfortunately is not under control in this country, it's growing in a majority of states. But at the same time, the recession is evolving in ways that is, it's developing its own dynamic. Whereas in the beginning, industries that were affected by the pandemic, airlines, travel, lodging, hotels, restaurants, etc., were hit really hard. I still, I'll probably remember my whole life, my last meal out. And, there was a lot of concern about COVID-19, but I figured, I had noticed that the number of customers had been dropping. And I figured, well, there won't be that many, so we can socially distance and stuff. And then my wife and I walked in at 6 o'clock on Saturday night, and there was no customers in the entire restaurant. So it was like 175 foot capacity. And we were the only two ones there. So So that was before there were shelter-in-place orders, the foot traffic. And I have students who worked in hotels in San Francisco, and they said some of their occupancy rates were down to like 3%, right? And so these industries were being hit even before there were the stay-at-home orders really hard. And but more and more we see the recession spreading to a wide range of industries that haven't been immediately hit by the recession. So for example, recently, along with some, there have been industries that it's a result of recession. So the most noticeable were perhaps Disney Corporation announced it's laying 28,000 workers off this month. The airlines have announced the cuts of about 32,000 this month, but also other industries that have, really very little directly to do with the pandemic. So Shell Oil is making large job cuts in the thousands. Military and weapons builder Raytheon is also making big job cuts. And so we can see that these, from oil and gas to the military to the government, these are industries that are not directly being impacted by the pandemic, but the economy, the economic crisis drags on, they are being hit hard. Just to give a little bit of maybe an update, remember that data I've just been talking about is from a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks now, but the latest report on unemployment, which also comes from the Labor Department, basically shows that there was no decline in new applications for the latest week that ended September 26th. There was a small decline in the number of regular state unemployment applications, but this was offset by an increase in the number of the federal pandemic unemployment assistance program, which is designed for self-employed and so-called gig workers that often aren't covered by regular state unemployment. So the unemployment numbers continue at a very high level. It's at, sorry, I should know this by heart, but I'm going to be looking at it. Oh, boo. So anyway, it's I think it's in the period of 800,000 or so, and then the other thing is the largest single report, or the broadest report that includes the regular state unemployment, that federal PUA, as I mentioned, and then also the federal emergency unemployment compensation. Sorry, there's this alphabet soup of acronyms going on, and then and the extended benefits, both of which the last two I mentioned have both been were both designed to cover people who have been unemployed for more than 6 months, and so they've run out of their regular state unemployment, and those two benefits continue to grow, as well as the total number that includes the regular state, the federal, and these extension programs. Those are continuing to grow. So this is reflective of the fact, and this is also showed up in the unemployment report, that there's a growing number of people who are long-term unemployed. Because, for example, when the recession first hit, a lot of people, most people, reported they expected their unemployment to be temporary, and most of them did, and many of their employers were actually expecting or hoping that it would also be a temporary layoff. But in fact, things have dragged on a lot more, and even though many businesses have reopened, they're not reopening at the same level as they were before the recession hit. So I'm sorry, the actual number of the regular state unemployment claims was 837,000, so I was off a little bit. But still, we have a total between when we get to all of the programs, the total is over 26.5 million people getting some kind of aid from the government. So one of the problems, of course, is that aid took a big drop in September because of the end of the additional $600 a week in unemployment insurance benefits, and another recent report in the last week that came out on personal income showed that income from unemployment insurance and other benefit programs dropped by half in August as compared to July. And of course, there's a little bit of aid that came through one of Trump's executive orders, but most of that has already been exhausted. And unfortunately, there's really a need for more support from the federal government. The Democrats have come up, they passed a $3.5 trillion bill back in May to extend many of the initial benefits that were passed in March. But basically, the Republican Party never came up with anything. They had a proposal for $1 trillion, but one of the problems the Republicans have is they don't even have enough unity to pass a bill in the Senate because they have a hard core of a dozen or more senators who don't want to vote for any more money. And this was shown in a recent vote that to extend the federal budget, this didn't expand spending at all. It just said, oh, we're going to continue spending the way we have been to avoid a partial shutdown of the federal government. And a dozen Republican senators voted no. It's like, no, if you don't give us some cuts, we'd rather shut the whole thing down, which is a little bit crazy in the midst of a recession and a pandemic. But that's the way it is. The Democrats in the House did come back with a more compromising proposal, $2.2 trillion. So they came back $1.33 trillion. And what did in contrast, the Republicans, instead of saying, okay, well, let's go up a little bit and, work out a compromise, they came back with a proposal for like $300 billion. So they cut their proposal. So again, they're far apart. And, that's not serious negotiating for anyone who knows, who's been part of any kind of union negotiating or whatever. In fact, legally, you can't do that. The employer can't come in and make one offer and then come back if you come down on your offer and say, okay, well, we're going to take back most of our offer, but there's no rules when it comes to this. There's a question, I might as well mix this in, about what steps could the federal government take to reignite a jobs recovery. I mean, the thing is, there's two things, and they're both going to take time. I mean, the immediate thing is there needs to be a lot more relief for the unemployed, for some of the small businesses. There needs to be continued protection of tenants from eviction, and there needs to be protection of people from having their utilities shut off. Now, I know in many states, especially in the Northeast and northern part of the US, there's already a utility shut-off ban. Often it can start on October 1st, just because every winter they don't want you to have your electricity or heat turned off. But there's other states, like here in California, where we don't have real cold winters, luckily. We do have sort of hot summers, but that's another issue. People, there was a temporary ban passed by the state, but those bans are expiring sort of state by state And that's something that's going to be important, because if people don't, I mean, one of the things is if people don't have electrical power, I mean, it's just not light or your food or anything. You don't have, if you have a computer, your computer doesn't work, and you sort of lose connection, you know, that a lot of us have, that we're having right now, hopefully, through the internet. That all goes away. So there needs to be money for the unemployed, protections for renters and people, households who are having a hard time paying their utility bills. There needs to be aid for state and local governments, because basically almost all state and local governments, they can't run a budget deficit. So what's happening right now is the government, the tax money is down because a lot of people are out of work, and then spending is up because they passed a lot of aid back in March, trillions of dollars of aid. And the federal government can just borrow all of that. But state and local governments can't do that. They don't have a credit card that they can just run up even temporarily. When they run short of money, they either have to raise taxes or cut spending. And many times it's a lot of areas, including here in California, conservative politicians have made it really hard to raise taxes. And so the choice then becomes to cut spending. So it's really the federal government that needs to step in on that. And then we also need the federal government to really take a strong stand against the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, that's sort of obvious that, it's, I guess it's irony. I'm not sure if there's other words for it, I'm sure. But, unfortunately, to say the federal government should lead on that. In fact, the federal government, with President Trump at the top and at the center, has been actually pushing back against science, against public health recommendations, have tried to ignite the right wing to, open bars and other types of indoor activity that are really not safe. And, there seems to be a race to the bottom among some of the Republican governors to let's see who can open up the most stuff. I mean, the one I hear more about is in the case of Florida. And Florida had this big outbreak. It was one of the worst states. And it's not quite as bad as it was, but it's by no means, Florida is not one of the better states. And the governor basically said, no limits on any kind of business activity, and banned any local governments from taking strict limits to restrict indoor dining, bars, requiring people to wear masks, anything like that. So, I mean, that's something that's definitely needed from the federal government. But right now, things are not looking good, both because there's a hardcore of Republican senators who don't want to pass anything. And, it doesn't mean like Mitch McConnell could pass something. He'd just have to work with the Democrats in the Senate to pass something, because all he needs is to bring along around 4 or 5 Republican senators with him, and he could pass something, but he's not willing to do that. And so things don't look good from that point of view. It's also because, they're sort of dead set, to be more polite in my wording, on trying to ram through the nomination of a conservative Supreme Court justice. And that's basically taking all of the Senate's efforts. And then in looking back to what happened in March, you might, I've often asked myself, well, why did the Republicans come through with a big aid package? And I think it was the stock market falling like 20-25%. So unfortunately, the only thing I could, because in the short term, short a Democratic president and a Democratic take over the Senate, the only thing I could see that would really put the fire under Republican senators to act immediately is a 20% drop in the stock market. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average, going down around 5,000 points. And I think both for Trump and a lot of Republican senators, that's what they think of as the economy. And in a certain sense, it's reality because most of the senators are millionaires, and millionaires, the top 1% of the population, they own a majority of the stock. So their lives, their economic well-being is linked to the stock market. And I mean, how many senators and Congress people, they have a pretty good job security. So they're not, many of them aren't really that concerned about the unemployment rate. So anyway, to get back to the question, there needs to be more economic relief, and there needs to be more action taken to fight the pandemic. So there's another question. What do you think Trump's health will have? Do you think Trump's health will have a long-standing effect on the economy? That's really hard to speculate on because, I mean, for one, I think very few people actually know the state of President Trump's health, because the latest thing I read right before this program is his doctor admitting that, well, yeah, he did get some oxygen. Well, yeah, he was, having his oxygen levels did go down significantly a few times. So we're not getting a straight story on what his health would be. Again, a lot of Republicans, they're trying to continue business as normal, which has been pretty disastrous for the economy and for the state of the pandemic. I think the only thing that actually, anyway, I should just leave it at that. So I don't tend to think it'll have a long-standing effect on the economy. But having said that, it's because I don't know what the state of his health was. So, and I don't know what the reaction will be. I think, let's see, unless there's other, yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm just checking over. So anyway, there's a new question. Do you think Biden getting into office will affect the economy? I think first of all, in general, the impact of a president and their administration is generally somewhat limited on the economy as a whole. We have the largest capitalist economy in the world. There's a number of major corporations that dominate the economy. You know them. The newest group of monopolies, they're often sometimes referred to as the FANG stops: Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. And those are just the new monopolies. There's older ones too. And that's where the real decision-making is made. Now, in times of crisis, which you could argue that we are in an economic crisis, we're definitely in a healthcare crisis, the leadership from the federal government can make a big difference. I think that one of the biggest factors on what difference Biden would make if he's elected, I hope he's elected, will be what happens in the Senate, because if the Republicans keep control of the Senate, they'll be basically able to block a lot of initiatives. And in fact, they may be even more likely to block just because of partisanship, or to say, fight back against the Democrats. So that's going to be probably the single biggest factor. To the extent that Biden can actually improve, fighting the pandemic, that'll be good. But I should note that electing a Democrat is not a total solution. You can just look here in the state of California, where although our numbers are definitely better than the national average, and they're getting better slowly, so at least we're not one of the states where numbers are going up, but it's been really slow effort, and there's still a really strong influence on business and profits on what should be public health decisions, because basically, our governor, Governor Newsom in California, Joe Biden, they're both from the same sort of centrist, pro-business Democratic Party. So they're going to be sort of weighing what they think is the business interest, which means short-term profitability with, the pandemic. So they aren't denialists, so that's certainly better than Trump and company, but it's not great. And then if you look at how California, and again, this problem has existed before Newsom, but before Newsom, we had another Democratic governor, Brown, for many, 8 years. California's unemployment insurance system is probably rivals Florida. It's the other state I hear bad stuff about. We have one of the worst in the country. We just did a backlog, or they're trying to fix it, but there's like 1.5 million people in California whose unemployment insurance claims have not been properly processed. And that includes hundreds of thousands of people who were processed and they got one payment and then it stopped. I don't even know why that could even happen, but evidently it's happening. So they're actually stopping new claims. So there's again going to be a buildup, but they're trying to clean up the mess. But this is like 6 months into, the recession. I mean, I would be perfectly understanding if the tidal wave of unemployment insurance in March and April overwhelmed the system, but it's been 6 months since April and it's still a mess. And that's, just a sign that the Democrats don't really care that much about having a well-functioning, well-financed unemployment insurance system. And again, I can't, it'd probably be even hard to find out exactly what Biden says because he's been in the federal government for so long. And most of the unemployment insurance systems are run by state governors. Now, one good thing is, in a way, it's good, I think. Biden has pulled all of his negative ads about Trump and is trying to put out his own message. And the only thing I think it's good about that, because it's good to try and learn exactly what Biden stands for. So I've been seeing a number of ads because I've been watching TV more since I got the news that, watching the news more since I got the news about Trump. And, there's some good things about Biden. He definitely is much more trying to reduce the level of, or the carbon footprint of the US economy. He's not a denialist like Trump and many of the Republicans. Now, how fast he'll move, and of course he'll move in a way that is aimed at maintaining business profitability. But I think in the long term, that can have some environmental impact. And this is, this is really important in so many areas of the country where, especially in the Southeast, you have these, hurricane seasons again. I know we've run already into the Greek letters because they've run out of, our regular 26 letters to name all the hurricanes here in California. We're having these massive wildfires. And even though most people aren't in the wildfire zone, because they tend to be more rural and suburban, small town areas. But the smoke and the pollution from the fire have been spreading over much of the state. And this is going to be a chronic problem. We had a big set of fires that were set by lightning, so it's not man-made. It wasn't due. A lot of the fires, unfortunately, were due to negligence and basically cost cutting by our utility, Pacific Gas and Electricity. But many of these recent ones have been lightning strikes, and they've been massive, and that's, again, climate change. So I think that's a good thing. Now, on the other hand, there's also a message in Biden's economic ads about Buy American and reducing dependence on China. And this is, to me, sort of a very dangerous slogan, because in the past, Buy American has led to a lot of anti-Asian sentiment in particular, and it tends to try and put blame on other countries as opposed to the US corporations that are moving their production to other countries. Because most of our imports from China and from Mexico and from Canada, it's actually US companies that have moved their production to those companies. So, for example, right now, I'm speaking to you on an Apple computer, and of course, I'm not being paid by Apple, by the way. I have to tell my classes that because I'm waving this stuff around. But it's not just Apple. I mean, if I was on a Dell or an HP, or I had a Samsung, I mean, a lot of this stuff is, it is a lot of it made in China, but it's not. It's for Apple, it's an American company. Its headquarters, I'm like 3-4 miles away from their headquarters. In fact, if you look at some of your Apple stuff, I'm really getting into it. It'll say designed in Cupertino or Cupertino, USA. So it's really these corporations are shifting their jobs to other countries. And again, I'm worried about a reduced dependence on China. I mean, if you're talking about personal protective equipment, and that's fine. I mean, every country should have their own personal protective equipment capacity if possible, because when a worldwide pandemic hits, you want to be able. You can't really count on other countries. But I think it's unfortunately probably part of a larger sort of anti-China effort that we've seen, like the recent attempts, and it's sort of in court limbo right now, to shut down TikTok, for example, which I actually downloaded it after I heard about the coming ban, because I've heard of it, but I'm like, well, let me check it out. And I'm like, anyway, I just don't see the national security threat there. But it's just part of this whole effort. Let's see. Oh, there's a new question. Okay. Well, I think there's so the question is that a lot of immigrant individuals have been left out of different, immigrant individuals and their families have been left out of the recent care packages. So, for example, the $1,200 per adult individual, it excluded not only undocumented, but the $500 per child allowance was excluded. Excluded children who had an undocumented parent, and actually the spouse of an undocumented person was excluded too. So it wasn't just excluding the undocumented, it was excluding their whole families. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't looked at the latest Democratic proposal to see if it's any better on that ground. Unfortunately, I'm guessing that if they do manage to pass something, because of Republican opposition, my guess is that it may not be in there. And that's something definitely that, in my view, needs to be pushed for. In fact, I think that hopefully Biden will win and hopefully the Democrats will take over the Senate. But in my view, they really need to be pushed on the whole immigration issue, because if we look back, the last time this happened with Obama in 2008, and the Democrats took both the House, took control of both the House and the Senate, and they did not do anything in terms of immigration legislation in the first 2 years. In fact, Obama stepped up deportations because he thought that would make the Republicans more likely to compromise, which of course they didn't. So we ended up just, having record numbers of deportations on his name. And so I think there needs to be a big push in the next, 2 years, hopefully, around immigration, around legalizing the status of the DACA and DACA eligible youth, in particular, around the those with the temporary protected status, people who fled natural disasters, wars, pandemics. Many of them have been here for 20 years or more, and they should be outright legalized so they know their situation. And then, I think we should, anyway, we need to just try and legalize as many parts of the undocumented population as possible, so that they can, like the DACA, get a job, pay their taxes without fear, get their driver's licenses, etc. The second part of the question was to say have more taxes on billionaires. I definitely like that idea. Well, actually, anyway, let's not go quite to socialism, because it could go a little further with the billionaires than just tax them. But I do think, I haven't studied it, but Biden's tax plan does plan on increasing taxes for people earning more than $400,000 a year. It's not, politically realistic for something like that to happen, at least until February. And it would take, again, a Democratic takeover of the Senate. I think, again, it would have to be pushed because there are enough conservative Democrats to, I think, block a lot of the more progressive taxation desires, of the people, which is the clear popular support for taxing the rich more. But again, the Senate is not representative even from their own interest. Well, even Biden himself, he makes like, he and his wife make close to $1 million a year. And he does pay taxes, and they pay like $300,000 in taxes, and as opposed to Trump's paying like $750. Or there was a thing going around about, do something, put some kind of emoji if you paid $750 for every $750 in taxes. And I'm like, yeah, I'd have to have emojis all over the page. I pay a lot more taxes than Trump does. And the last thing to remember is that while I think it is important, sorry, I need to tax the wealthy more, in part because this the huge economic inequality that we see under capitalism in general, but it's gotten worse over the last 40 years, and then it's gotten worse over the last 8 months. And so I should just mention that with the jobs that were being cut in the beginning tended to be more low paid. So actually there was a little statistical oddity. Right at the beginning of the recession, average wages went up because they weren't counting everyone who was not working. So of those people working, the average went up because a lot of people at the bottom of the pay scale, so many of them were getting laid off. So we're actually, unlike the Great Depression, with the inequality has really jumped dramatically with a lot more lower income workers losing their jobs, and at the same time, the stock market making a full recovery. And in fact, some indices, some measures of the stock market hitting new record highs in September. But the point I was going to make is actually for the federal government, they don't need to tax more to spend more. They can just borrow the money. And that's what needs to be done in the short term, that if you condition an aid package on taxing the rich more, it's not going to happen. But you can always spend now and tax later, in my view. So that's, but state and local governments can't borrow money to help fund services or the schools or things like that. So that's why the federal government, in my view, should be borrowing the money and then helping the state and local governments. Now this last question, I think this is a little bit off my topic. My specialty is economics. I have studied not just the economics, but political, historical, social inequalities among oppressed nationalities, especially Japanese and among Asian Americans. And I actually started off in college as a biochemistry major, so I probably take a more than the average interest in the actual COVID-19 itself. But what happens if Trump dies is really beyond that. I think I think the most important thing right now is really, in my view, is to look at what the people really need, what kind of economic aid they need, what kind of political changes need to be done, what kind of changes like community control of the police need to be done. How can we there's going to be a lot of budget cuts at the colleges and schools. How can we better fund our educational system, protect workers' rights, et cetera. And as you know, I really don't want to entertain any thoughts of, well, I don't want to speculate on Trump's demise. Perhaps this is one time where I will quote from our president in terms of his health. It is what it is. And maybe that's a good time to end this talk. I do want to remind people this talk is being brought to you by the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. If you want more information, go to the website FRSO.org. If you go to FRSO.org/join, you can find how to join the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, how to get involved in the people's movement, how to learn more about socialism. If you want to read more about the economy, you could go to, there is economic material on the FRSO website, but it's not as recent. It's more general analysis of capitalism, which I think is very good. But if you want more of the latest news, you can also go to Fight Back News, and that's at www.fightbacknews.org, and that's where you can find my latest article on the unemployment insurance, and hopefully, within hours, maybe finding an article on what's happening with unemployment, and in particular, what's happening to women in the labor force. Let's see. I can't think of anything else to say. So, okay. Check us out and stay safe, and let's continue the people's struggle and defeat the Trump and his administration. And I will see you next month. All right, this is Masao Suzuki.